Working at the shaving horse is about the most satisfying work a person can do. You sit down, put a rough split billet of wood in the jaws of the horse, and clamp it tight with your foot on the bottom of the lever. The horse, which you have tailored to fit your body, holds the workpiece perfectly positioned as you sail through it with a razor-sharp draw knife. Welcome back to another Trustin Timber film. In this video, we make a shaving horse out of one single cedar tree. I would have liked to split it out traditionally with a wedge, but this tree had a lot of twist in it and I would have ended up with a pretty warped board. So I decided to just use a chainsaw mill and mill myself out some nice 12-quarter slabs of cedar. Let's get started. So here I'm running an Alaskan chainsaw mill with a Husqvarna chainsaw with a 30-inch bar. It's going through the cedar pretty smoothly. While the cedar tree still had some mass to it, I gave it a quick hand plane just to smooth out the mill marks. Then I did my second cut with a 3-inch depth, giving myself a 12-quarter board that was about 10 to 12 inches wide. I removed all the bark and the sapwood with a draw knife. Sometimes you come across knots that are easier dealt with using a carving axe. The board looked pretty straight, so it was time to start on the legs. And I know you're not supposed to use metal on metal, so I made myself a mallet, which didn't last very long, so I resorted back to metal. Now the ideal tool for making legs is of course a shaving horse, but since I didn't have one yet, I just made some temporary legs to get it functioning, and I'm going to make some nicer legs in a later video. When making anything round, it's always better to square your workpiece first to the relative size, and then work down the corners to create the round shape. Roy Underhill says that it's always good to have a long taper in case the wood shrinks over time. You can always just keep driving the legs in further later. But I get a little carried away and I taper a little too much. I cut my bench to 5 feet long. I used the circular saw to make a majority of my cuts and then just finished off the depth that the circular saw didn't reach with the handsaw. I'm using a layout technique that I call the vanishing point that allows me to evenly space my legs apart, but more importantly it creates a line that I can use as a guide to align my hand auger with to drill the holes to create the proper angle for my legs. Roy says that it's best to make one hole at a time and put the leg in position and then use that leg to give yourself a longer guide angle to reference when you drill your second hole. Now I have to admit I'm really embarrassed that I misjudged the width of these legs so poorly. The whole time I was thinking I should really get a caliper and measure these, but once I get an axe in my hand it's hard to pull me off and I just want to chop and shave and make wood chips. So I resorted to adding a little bit of tape and I'm just going to wedge these. Nothing a little sawdust won't fill. I've been using this Japanese saw I bought from the Samurai Carpenter's website, and it is unbelievably fast. So here I'm going back to the other board that I cut off from the bench, and I'm cutting off a 6-inch riser block that's going to hold up the riser. And because it was a little wider than that part of the bench because of the taper of the tree, I just drew a line and took it down with the axe. And how cool is this? I literally have a nice smooth finish coming right off my axe. It pays to have a nice sharp axe. It's worth the little extra time to get a nice sharp edge on your axe, and make sure you use a strop just to make sure that edge lasts longer. So now I'm using the board that I milled off on the first pass that still has the curved outside edge of the tree, and I'm going to use this to create my dumb head out of. The dumb head is the piece that holds your work in place when you push down on the foot treadle. My dumb head piece is 36 inches long total, and I cut a 6-inch head on that, and for the arm I cut it at 2 inches by 3 inches. Now for these two mortises that you need to cut out of the bench and the riser, you could just drill the holes and chop it out with a hatchet, but I wanted it to be a nice clean fit, so I just used a circular saw. The more cuts you make in there with the circular saw, the easier it is to chisel out. But because my circular saw doesn't reach all the way through the 3 inches, it only has a 2.5-inch depth cut, you gotta work from both sides. Then you just clean out all the excess and give yourself some nice edges with a chisel. And And there we go. If you measured properly, that should fit nice and snug. Once you have the mortise cut in your riser, lay that on top of your bench nice and square, and then use that to trace your new lines onto the bench to make sure everything aligns properly. Again, just like with my axe, I can't overstate the value and importance of having sharp tools. It just makes all of this way more fun. So now you've got all the pieces that you need to put it all together and see how it fits. You don't want to peg anything until you've had a chance to sit on it and feel it all out, move the dumb head back and forth, put a piece of wood in there, and just make sure that everything fits and feels right to you before you peg anything. Always leave yourself the option to make changes as long as possible. When it comes to boring your pivot hole for your dumb head shaft, it's helpful to have some friends to help you align this in position so that you can drill a nice straight line all the way through for your dowel. That wooden peg gets driven all the way through and becomes the axis pivot point in the shaft for the dumb head to pivot on. So the only thing left was to make the foot treadle. So you can pretty much grab any piece of wood for this and cut it to about a foot long. Place it underneath your bench and let the shaft rest on it. This allows you to trace out the exact shape you need, and then you just gotta bore out that mortise. If you keep that mortise nice and tight, it'll pretty much hold itself, and this allows you to move it up and down the shaft as you need, depending on the size of wood that you're working with. But I threw a peg in the bottom anyways, just to make sure it doesn't fall off when I move it. I rounded the front corners of my foot treadle so that it could fit between the front legs of the bench. Now it was time to fix everything into position. The front and back of the risers need to be blind pegged. To do this, drive small nails where you want the pegs to be on your bench and snip the tops. When you set the riser back in position and apply pressure, you will transfer those marks. Pull the riser back off and remove the nails. Now you have the perfect alignment for your pegs. I like to point the edges of my pegs because it's bound to push some wood chips in there along the way, and this way it just manages to get in all the way through a little deeper. It's really just held in place by the pressure and friction against those pegs. If it ever loosens up, I guess you could just add thicker pegs. But you definitely want to make sure you force that in there all the way down. And now it's just time to wiggle that foot treadle up and put the peg in, and she's ready to go. I use the same blind peg technique to peg the riser into the bench. Roy says that you can just peg right through your riser into the riser block, but I didn't really feel like making holes in my riser, so I just have it resting on top since most of the force is in a downward motion. Eventually maybe I will put pegs through there just to fix it in place permanently. This is an incredibly fun project to make. It's a very simple tool set. You don't have to worry too much about measuring or making mistakes. You just get out an axe, a saw, a drill, and get to work and have some fun. And once it's done, it's incredibly fun to use. It's extremely fulfilling just to get that wood clamped in place and just make shavings. A shaving horse can be used to make canoe paddles, bow and arrows, handles for tools, table legs, anything that requires a unique and rounded shape. So there we have it, a woodworking machine built out of a single tree. It's extremely efficient for working wood, really fast or really detailed. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I've got a whole list of other projects here, and I've got a whole second channel of special features that includes behind the scenes and other crazy adventures that I get into, so go over there and check that out as well.